Hello, it's Jim Lynn here. Welcome back to my workshop. This is my record number 405 MultiPlane. Now, I've had this for quite some time, probably more than 10 years, but I've never actually used it. Now, I've had it out the box quite often and I've planned in my mind how I'm going to get it working. But I've always packed it away again, you know, for when I've got more time. Now, at first glance it looks like a complicated fiddly contraption. And indeed, these multiplanes have had the reputation of being, you know, a jack of all trades and master of none, and also of being too fussy and fiddly to set up and use. But are they really? Is that reputation justified? Or does that opinion say more about the impatience of the opinionator? Well, there's only one way to find out, and that's to prepare it for use as best we can and then give it a go. So in this video, I'm going to dismantle the tool completely. We're going to examine each part carefully, we're going to do any work we need to do, and then we'll reassemble it and see if we can get it working as smoothly as we possibly can. Now, I'm hoping that this will help us to become completely familiar with all the components, and then in a companion video we'll learn how to use it. So let's start at the beginning. My multiplane came in its original box, which has become a bit worn over the years. I did think about restoring this box, and I know it would look good if I did, but it would take a lot of time, and anyway, I like the fact that all the dings and dents are evidence that it's been doing its job over the decades, you know, protecting the plane inside. So I'll just back burner that task for now. I like the diagrams on the inside of the lid, and there's a copy of the instruction book which is handy. Now we'll look at both of these in more detail in the next video, but for the moment, here's the major components. There's only three major body parts that make up this plane, all connected by two rods. From left to right, we've got the main stock, which has the handle for the right hand, then the sliding section, then the fence, which has the knob for the left hand. In addition, we've got a pair of long arms and a pair of short arms, an adjustable beading stop, a sliding section depth gauge, and a cam steady. Of course, there's also a set of cutters, and we'll need to fiddle all of these too. Now, when it was new, the multiplane would have come with a standard set of 23 cutters. My set is missing 4. There is 3 extra fluting cutters, but I'd rather have the missing 4. Anyway, there's a Philister cutter, 8 plough or dado cutters, 3 missing from that group, 6 beading cutters, 1 missing, a sash cutter, 2 match cutters, and the 3 extraneous fluting cutters. I've connected the main stock and the sliding section together with the short rods so that you can see the concept behind this plane. This is effectively a variable width plane body. Now, this makes sense when you remember that the idea is for the whole plane body to descend into the cut, and the width of that cut varies. You can see here that the sliding section is quite stiff to move, so some work needed there for sure. First, we'll look at the parts of the plane that come into contact with the work, and these are the outer surface of the main stock skate, the outer surface of the sliding section skate, and the narrow soles of both skates. Now, the inner surfaces of both skates don't touch the work, but we'll still clean them up. Next is the cutter bearing surfaces. Now, straight away here I can see a problem. The surface on the sliding section is not coplanar with the surface on the main stock, and that's going to take a wee bit of work to get right. However, both surfaces are rough, so they need smoothing anyway, so I'll just do more work on the higher surface first. The soles aren't coplanar either, but it does depend how far apart they are. You can see here with the two soles wide apart, when I balance my winding sticks on them, they're not too bad. However, they're not often going to be that far apart. Of greater importance is what they're like when close together within cutter width. And in this case, the twist is much more pronounced. But I'm not overly concerned. This should be quick work on a granite reference plate. Let's look at the major body parts in more detail, and we'll start with the main stock. On the left is the slitting cutter, and this has its own depth gauge. This cutter is used for slicing strips off thin stock, for example veneers. On the right is the adjustable depth gauge, and that has a fine adjustment knob. On the skate near the lower edge there's a little spur. Now this is supposed to be sharp, and when it's deployed it should score the wood ahead of the cutter, and that will give you clean cuts across the grain. And there's another one on the lower edge of the skate of the sliding section. In the centre of the main stock is the cutter bolt wing nut, and this locks the cutter in position. And on the other side we can get a better idea of how the cutter is secured and adjusted. The cutter bolt clamps the cutter against the main stock right down to the bevel, and the cutter is supported on the right hand edge by the skate of the main stock and on the left hand edge by the skate of the sliding section. There's a little pin in the cutter adjusting screw which engages in a slot in the cutter, so when you turn the cutter adjusting screw wheel, the pin raises and lowers the cutter. To remove the cutter bolt, this little key pin has to be removed first, then the bolt drops out, and after that we can remove the wing nut assembly. There's no way I can see to remove the adjustment wheel without somehow removing the pin, and if I damage that there's no way back, so I'm going to work around it instead. This is the sliding section. This provides the adjustable support for the cutter. As already mentioned, it's got the other spur for cross grain work. The final major component is the fence assembly. So this has a knob for the left hand, a really nice piece of rosewood that slides along the work, and a method of fine adjustment. Now, like the cutter adjustment screw, I can't see any way of dismantling this further without damage, so I'm leaving it. Well, that's everything taken apart as far as possible, so now we can begin the SuperTune. I started with a general cleanup using a steel bristle wire brush. This MultiPlane isn't one of the nickel plated ones. This seems to be what was known as war finish. Well, this type of finish, or lack of it, was introduced during World War II, I think in an effort to save nickel. I like this finish. It's utilitarian. It's rougher looking, sure, but it's easy to keep clean. I've got a set of brushes I got cheap somewhere, and they've proved useful for cleaning and smoothing holes, especially when you chop them up in a drill. This is a steel one, and I use that to clean all the smooth bore holes. I've got a nylon one to clean any threaded holes. Although the risk is slight, I don't want to risk any damage. Finally, I go back through all the holes with a nylon brush to ensure all the dust is out, and there was quite a lot. The outer surfaces of each skate need cleaning and smoothing, so I started with 800 grit paper. It's just to get an idea of any high or low spots. This image shows the depressions where the paper hasn't touched. I need to wear away the polished area to get down in there, so I switched to 180 grit paper to make some progress. Incidentally, I waxed the vertical edge of the granite plate to reduce friction. I did the same with the sliding section skate. Once I'd got the entire length of the working surface of each skate smooth and planar, I worked back up through the grits to 1200 grit. Here I'm finishing off the sliding section. Then some polish and wax to clean and protect. This took a morning to do both skates. The result is quite acceptable. I've decided not to get too fussed about these linear streaks. Those are inevitable if you can only abrade in one axis. Also, as far as what the wood sees, this is smooth enough. A planar surface is the goal anyway, and I like to persuade myself that the streaks will hold wax for lubricant. After doing all this, I remembered that at some point I'll need to make sure the cross-grain spurs are brought coplanar, so there may well be a return to the higher grit later on, but for now the wax will protect the surface whilst I do other work. Well, that's it for part 1, everyone. I think we're off to a good start, but so far everything's been fairly straightforward. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in part 2.